19,000 men. That's 3 times the capacity of Madison Square Garden. All of them condemned to die, but promised mercy if they performed well. They fought brilliantly, perfectly. Even the crowd roared its approval. The emperor smiled and nodded. Victory was theirs. And then the emperor's thumb turned down, resume combat, until all are dead. Today we're diving into the moments when even Romea's civilization, built on conquest and blood-crossed lines that horrified its own people. When entertainment became something so dark, so twisted, that it changed the very soul of an empire. This is the Hollow Throne. What you're about to hear will change how you see human nature forever. We think we know the Roman Games gladiators, fighting for glory, crowds cheering for their heroes, noble combat under the Mediterranean sun. But that's Hollywood. The reality was something far more sinister. Something that started as a sacred ritual and ended as industrial-scale murder. Today, we're going beyond the sanitized version you learned in school. We're going into the archives, the first-hand accounts, the engineering blueprints that reveal how Rome's greatest minds turned human suffering into a science. And here's what's truly terrifying. Every step of the way seemed logical to them, reasonable, even entertaining. So how does a civilization go from honoring the dead to feeding Christians to lions for fun? The answer might be closer to home than you think. It started with love. The year was 264 BC, and Rome was mourning Decimus Junius Brutus Scaever, beloved senator who'd served the Republic faithfully. His sons wanted to honor him properly, not just with the usual funeral games, chariot races, athletic competitions, but with something that would truly reflect their father's warrior spirit. So they brought out 6 slaves, 3 pairs, and they made them fight to the death. This wasn't gladiatorial combat as we know it. This was called Munusa duty to the dead. The blood wasn't just entertainment, it was an offering, a way to send warrior spirits to guide the deceased in the afterlife. The crowd that day came to mourn. They left talking about the fights. And that's when someone we don't know who had a thought that would eventually damn an entire civilization. If 6 slaves can honor 1 man, imagine what 100 could do. Within 50 years, every ambitious Roman politician had figured out the formula: more gladiators equals more votes. By 216 BC, 22 pairs fought at a single funeral. By 183 BC, 60 pairs. The duty to the dead had become something else, entirely arms race for political power. But it was Curio who changed everything. In 53 BC, this ambitious politician built something Rome had never seen before: the world's first rotating amphitheater. 2 separate semicircular theaters that could rotate on hidden pivots to form a complete arena. The engineering alone cost a fortune, but the psychological impact was priceless. Suddenly, death wasn't just entertainment. It was a technological marvel. Romans didn't just watch people die. They marveled at the ingenuity that made it possible. Julius Caesar took notes when his time came. He didn't just host games. He hosted spectacles. 320 pairs of gladiators, all equipped in silver armor that caught the sunlight like mirrors. The historian Pliny calculated the dark mathematics of Roman politics, reaching the consulship, the highest office required, causing approximately 100 deaths in the arena. 100 human lives. That was the price of power in Rome. And here's the most chilling part. By this point, no one was calling it murder anymore. They called it politics. Once you decide that human death is entertainment, you face a technical problem. How you make it better. Rome's answer was to turn sadism into a science. Meet the beast masters, Rome's first professional animal torturers. Their job was simple: make predators as aggressive as possible for maximum crowd satisfaction. Lions were starved for exactly 7 days any longer, and they'd be too weak to put on a good show. Any shorter, and they might not be desperate enough to attack humans immediately. Bears got 4 days, wolves got 6. Each species had its own starvation schedule, perfected through trial and error, and a lot of dead prisoners. But the prisoners fought back with their own twisted science. They'd starve themselves voluntarily, trying to become too weak to provide good entertainment, hoping Romans would find boring deaths. They'd exercise constantly, building muscle that might give them a fighting chance. Some even rolled in their own waste, hoping the smell would discourage animals from attacking. Rome's response: round-the-clock surveillance, force feeding, and if that didn't work, they'd bring in the prisoner's family and threaten to throw them in the arena too. But Rome's cruelest innovation was the aromatic blood spray. They discovered that certain scents mixed with fresh blood could trigger feeding responses in predators, so they'd spray the arena with these concoctions right before releasing the animals. Imagine being a condemned prisoner standing in that arena, and suddenly every wild animal can smell exactly where you are and thinks you're dinner. But if you want to understand how far Rome fell, look at Julius Caesar's naval games. This is where engineering brilliance met absolute evil. Caesar told 4,000 condemned prisoners they were digging a water reservoir for the city community service, a chance to give back to Rome before their executions. They worked for months, hauling dirt, laying stones, engineering drainage systems. Some of them were skilled craftsmen. They took pride in the work. When they finished, Caesar threw them a feast. Good food, wine, even entertainment for one night. They almost forgot they were condemned to die. The next morning, they woke up and realized what they'd actually built: not a reservoir, their own graveyard. Caesar forced them to reenact the Battle of Salamis, ancient Greece's greatest naval victory. 4,000 men divided into 2 fleets, fighting to the death with real weapons on real warships. The irony was perfect. Salamis was where free Greeks had fought off Persian invaders. Now slaves were forced to die recreating that ancient fight for freedom. When the carnage ended, 200 men were still alive. Caesar had promised the survivors would be pardoned. He kept his word. All 200 were freed. But 3,800 men had died, building and performing in Caesar's entertainment. The crowd cheered it as the greatest spectacle they'd ever seen. Caesar's heir Augustus looked at those temporary naval games and thought, we can do better. So he built Rome a permanent death lake, 1,800 feet by 1,200 feet, larger than 20 football fields filled with Mediterranean seawater, pumped in by a dedicated aqueduct, the Aqua Alsatian. An entire aqueduct built just to supply water for killing people. But engineering large-scale death presented unique challenges. Bodies kept fouling the water. The stench became unbearable. Spectators in expensive seats were literally vomiting from the smell of rotting flesh. Prisoners kept committing suicide by tying ballast stones to themselves and drowning before the games could begin. Rome's solution: sealed underwater compartments where prisoners could be held beneath the surface, then mechanically raised into combat zones. They also installed a continuous freshwater circulation system, not to be humane, but to keep the water clean enough that the crowd could actually see people die. Think about that for a moment. Rome's greatest engineers, the people who built aqueducts that still work today, spent their talents figuring out how to kill people more efficiently. And it worked. Augustus's naval games could slaughter thousands of people while keeping the water crystal clear for optimal viewing. The Romans called it their greatest engineering achievement. But Rome's cruelest innovation wasn't engineering. It was cultural. They took humanity's most sacred stories and turned them into execution scripts. The myth of Orpheus was beloved throughout the ancient world. The musician whose songs were so beautiful they could tame wild beasts, make trees dance, even convince Death himself to return his wife from the underworld. Roman crowds knew this story. Parents told it to children. It represented the power of art, love, and beauty to overcome violence. So naturally, Rome turned it into a torture method. They'd dress a condemned prisoner as Orpheus, give him a real lyre, and push him into the arena with hungry bears. The crowd would laugh as the prisoner frantically tried to charm the animals with music just like in the story. Children who loved the myth would watch wide-eyed, waiting for the magic to work. But Roman bears had been starved for 4 days. Music didn't matter. Art didn't matter. Beauty definitely didn't matter. Every myth became a murder script. Hercules' labors. Prisoners were forced to attempt them with real monsters and no divine strength. Icarus flying too close to the sun, they built functioning wings, strapped them to prisoners, and launched them from the arena's highest towers. Andromeda, chained to the rock, waiting for Perseus to save her. In Rome's version, Perseus never came, only the sea monster. Think about the psychological damage Roman children grew up watching their favorite heroes die horribly over and over again. Every bedtime story became a potential execution script. This wasn't just murder, it was the systematic destruction of hope, beauty, and meaning in an entire culture. But Rome saved its most twisted creativity for the Christians. Emperor Nero invented something called the tunica. Molest, the troublesome shirt prisoners were sewn into garments soaked in pitch and resin. Then they were tied to posts throughout Nero's private gardens and set on fire human torches to light his evening parties. But something unexpected happened, something that shook Rome to its core. The Christians didn't scream, they sang hymns, they prayed, some even seemed peaceful. Roman crowds came expecting to see people break down, beg for mercy, curse their gods. Instead, they witnessed something they'd never seen before, people dying without fear. Guards started deserting their posts. Executioners quit. Even the crowd began leaving early. The historian Tacitus wrote, though they were criminals, deserving extreme punishment, people began to pity them, feeling they were being destroyed, not for the public good, but to satisfy one man's cruelty. For the first time in Roman history, the audience was changing faster than the entertainment Christians were supposed to be, the victims, but somehow they were winning. Mass conversions began not because of Christian preaching, but because Romans witnessed something they couldn't explain, people who seemed genuinely unafraid of death. Rome had turned murder into entertainment, but the Christians had turned their own deaths into sermons, and sermons, it turned out, were more powerful than lions. By the time the Colosseum was built, Rome had perfected the science of death. Beneath the arena floor lay a city of 200 workers operating the most sophisticated killing machine in human history. They called it the Hypogeum, the underground, a maze of corridors, elevators, and chambers that could transform the arena floor into anything, a forest, a lake, a mountain, or hell itself. The workers had their own language for what they did. Them never said execution or murder. They called it the performance. Prisoners weren't killed, they were retired from the cast. This wasn't accidental. Rome had learned that if you make people think of murder as theater, it becomes easier to participate. The underground could flood with 3 feet of water in under 7 minutes. For naval battles, mechanical elevators could lift entire forests with live animals hiding inside up through the arena floor. But the system had a fatal flaw. During test floods, workers sometimes got trapped in the lower levels when water rushed in faster than expected. Rome's solution wasn't better safety measures. They removed the emergency drainage systems to maintain water integrity during naval shows. They decided that perfect spectacles were worth more than workers' lives if a few dozen stagehands drowned during performances. Well, that was just overhead. The workers knew this. They knew that every time they flooded the arena, some of them might die, but they kept working. Because in Rome, even the people operating the death machine could become part of the show. But if you want to see how completely Rome had lost its soul, look at Emperor Claudius's naval games in 52 AD. This wasn't just entertainment. This was a betrayal so profound, it shocked even Rome's blood-soaked crowd. 19,000 condemned men, the largest single combat event in recorded history. They were told to reenact a famous naval battle, and if they fought well, if they gave the crowd a good show, the survivors would be pardoned. Before the battle began, the prisoners performed the traditional salute, Ave Imperator Morituri, Te Salutant, Hail Emperor. Those about to die, salute you. But Claudius shouted back, out, none or not. The prisoners hesitated. Did the emperor just suggest they might not die? Had he already decided to pardon them? So they fought beautifully, tactically brilliant, historically accurate. The crowd roared its approval. This was entertainment at its finest death, performed with actual skill and courage. When the battle ended, thousands were dead, but several hundred survivors floated in the water wounded but alive. They looked up at Claudius expectantly, and Claudius gave them his verdict: resume combat fight until all are dead. The crowd went silent. Even they hadn't expected this. The survivors were exhausted. Wounded some had fought for hours. Their arms could barely lift their weapons. But Claudius wasn't finished. He ordered archers positioned around the lake. Anyone who refused to fight, anyone who tried to escape, would be shot but not killed, just wounded enough to force they back into combat. So these broken, exhausted men kept fighting, not for glory, not for honor, simply because dying in combat hurt less than dying slowly from arrow wounds. One prisoner man named Theron of Athens screamed up at the imperial box, "You are all murderers. Every person watching this is a murderer." An archer's arrow found him a moment later, but his words echoed across the water. When it was over, 19,000 men were dead, every single one. Not one survivor, not one pardon, not one act of mercy. The crowd left in silence. Many were crying. Some vomited, others just sat in their seats, staring at the carnage. For the first time in Roman history, a crowd felt guilty about what they'd watched, but they'd still watched it, all of it to the end. Seneca the Younger, Rome's greatest moral philosopher, wrote something that should chill us all. I come home more cruel and inhuman the more often I go to the arena. Even Rome's wisest minds were infected by proximity to mass murder. They knew it was wrong. They felt themselves becoming worse people, but they kept going back. Because here's the terrifying truth. Rome didn't fall because of barbarian invasions or economic collapse. Those were symptoms. Rome fell because a civilization that turned compassion into entertainment eventually lost the capacity for both. You can't spend 500 years training your population to enjoy watching people die and expect them to suddenly care about defending each other when the real enemies arrive. The games didn't just kill the people in the arena. They killed something essential in everyone who watched. We like to think we're different, more civilized, more moral than those bloodthirsty Romans, but we've just moved our arena online. We don't gather in amphitheaters to watch people die anymore. We gather around our screens to watch people get destroyed in different ways. Public shaming, cancel culture, viral humiliation videos. We've found ways to destroy people that don't require actual death, but the appetite is exactly the same. And just like the Romans, we tell ourselves we're doing well. They called it honoring the dead. We call it accountability or justice. But the result is the same. We're training ourselves to find pleasure in human suffering. Seneca's warning echoes across 2,000 years. I come home crueler and inhuman. The medium has evolved. Human nature hasn't. Theron of Athens was right. When we consume human destruction as entertainment, whether in person or online, we all become murderers. The only question is, will we recognize what we're becoming before it's too late? Because in Rome's final days, everyone thought they were just spectators until they realized they were actually in the arena. Thanks for watching The Hollow Throne. If this made you think differently about human nature or made you uncomfortable about our own time, that was the point. History's darkest lessons are also its most important ones. I'll see you in the next episode if we all survive that long.